Hey guys, so today we are answering a subscriber question, and the question in question is, Frederick, what firm position that you used to have you now changed your mind about? So let's get into it. This is an excellent question, and it's not a tricky one, but it's a really good question. I suppose the only tricky part about it is to pick which one of my firm positions have I changed my mind about, because as you can imagine, I try to be less opinionated when we have our little chats like this, but I have my opinions as well. But I'll pick the one that I suppose is my favorite, that has helped me quite a lot in my career. So when I first started out, I had this idea that software was about creating a sustainable and perfect solution to any given problem, right? That was my idea as a junior. I know. But that is what I thought. I really did think that software was about software, as I call it, like mathematics is about mathematics. It's not about anything else. It's about that specific thing, right? And I would relentlessly try to think out the best possible solution for any given problem all the time. Like, it didn't matter what the circumstances were. And I was completely into the idea that we should try to look at the best practices of whatever, it doesn't really matter what you're building, right? You should abide by the best practices, and we should focus on trying to implement things in accordance with these best practices, and we should at all times try our best to, ideally just from scratch. If we're building something from scratch, it would be great, because then we can create the perfect solution or abide by the best practices of our time and just build things in the most modern way possible. And that should be it, right? And if we can, then we should immediately adopt some type of strategy for moving from what we have today, because that's not as good as what it could be, right? And try to migrate that into something that is better, right? And I was very much indoctrinated into this. An example would be that I really did, with all of my heart, I swear to God, I really did believe that any project you started that did any type of backend work should start out with microservices. You should start out immediately with microservices for every project. There was no discussion, because my thinking was very simple. If the end goal for me is to scale my system into something that is fairly large, something that is supposed to be the size of Google or Facebook or Netflix or whatever super system that you want to talk about, right? Then it makes sense for me to just kind of pave the road immediately, and then I can just hit the ground running when I get to a point where I can actually leverage a lot of this power that comes from microservices, right? And that is what I truly believe that. And it was very hard for me to accept that I was absolutely, completely wrong about this. And the reason why I kind of figured out why I was completely wrong about this came when I had a discussion with a few coworkers of mine at a previous job. And we talked about this idea of, microservices and large systems and things of this nature. And they kind of set me straight, because I was struggling a lot, because I was working at the time. And I think this was kind of healthy in a way. It's why I very much urge people to have some part of your progression through your career. You should really, if you've been lucky enough to work at only the most trendiest startups or something like that, and for some magical reason you've never actually worked on a system that is older than say 10 years or something like that, you should really take the chance to work on such a system, because it will help you get a more holistic understanding of software development and learn what architecture actually is, and that there are actually more than a few ways to build something. And just because something is on YouTube and something's being promoted by some blogger somewhere, that doesn't mean that that is the perfect solution. It's not a silver bullet. You may believe so, but it's not. And the reason why I figured that out was because I was actually trying quite hard to build my own small little application, my own small little startup thing with just microservices. And I figured after a while that there was quite a lot of time that I invested in just maintaining that, just setting up all the different repositories. So if you want to go with a monorepo and then having to orchestrate all of this and then deploying it and setting all that up, because now you need infrastructure and you need, of course, some type of scheduling system. Like the problem just kind of cascaded on me. And this is me just having a basic CRUD application with, I think, 3 or 4 entities within the system. It's like nothing. It's like the smallest little application in the world. I mean, there are web shops, WordPress sites that are bigger, right? And then synchronizing all the models, because if I change one field in this service, then I need to go and update it somewhere else, because I hadn't at that time learned how to do proper API specification maintenance and things like that, because that is a very tricky thing to do as a beginner. And this is what as I was saying, I was fairly fresh on things, and I thought I knew because I've watched all of the YouTube videos about this. I know my stuff, right? Fucking hell, I didn't know my stuff. Anywho, so my coworkers told me basically this: Frederick, if you start out with this sort of solution, you've basically created, although something that might be useful for you if you ever get to a point where you actually need it, you've created that already. But you're also paying the cost of having such a super solution right now. When in reality, you could just have gone with a simpler solution, something that will make you more productive right now, and then pay the cost of migrating that or splitting it out into, in this case, it was microservice. It doesn't matter what it is, right? But you've already tried to build a super solution on day one. And that is a big mistake, because on day one, what's more likely going to be the most important is to actually develop features, actually get the system off the ground. Because if nobody's using the system, who fucking cares what it's doing? I mean, it doesn't matter if it's perfect, flawless code implemented in some super fashion that is abiding by all the rules, right? If nobody uses it, then it's just you kind of building something for yourself, right? And that's the thing that I kind of realized. The analogy that I kind of landed in here is similar to, let's say that you want to build a road for a small town, just a sleepy little town with a few hundred people, right? Now, when you start thinking about building a road, you could absolutely go with the idea of, all right, I'm going to build a super highway. Something that would fit very well in New York City or somewhere where like you truly have the need to accommodate thousands, if not millions, of cars. You could do that because, I mean, technically after I don't know how many decades, this town will absolutely grow into something at some point that might need something like that. But is that the right choice for today? Because if you do something like that, imagine the inconvenience for all the people, like the few hundred cars that are already there, and the cost that they will have to pay to maintain that super highway. It might actually cripple quite a lot of the rest of the town. It might actually make the whole town, go into bankruptcy just because you have this super highway that where you have the potential to use it for quite a lot, but you're only able to leverage a fraction of the value that something like that could possibly bring you. So the way to go here is to build a road that is well suited for that given town. In this case, it might just have been a very small paved road or a dirt road or something, which perfectly fits into the needs of that specific situation, because the cost of just having that until such a point that the town has matured to a point where it actually makes sense to opt in for a more sophisticated road, I mean, it's a much better fit for that given problem. And that's the thing I want you to take away from this. It's kind of like, those games SimCity. If you have, in the beginning of the game, if you burn your entire budget on building like a super highway, you're just going to waste a lot of money and probably cripple the rest of your game, because you basically opted in for something that is much more powerful and completely unneeded. And the cost of migrating something is actually quite low if you ever get to a point where you where you actually need to do that migration. And sometimes you might not even need to do that migration, because remember, if you opt in for this superhighway and it takes you 10, 20 years to build that town up to a size where it actually needs it, then by that time, do you really think that we still have these best practices of today? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. There's a lot of unknowns and risk going into trying to create a super solution from day one. So in my world, the thing that I kind of learned from this experience of talking to my coworkers was to understand that it's actually not a bad idea to create a good solution or the best solution for the moment, even though it's not the right solution in 10 years. Because in 10 years it's a different situation, but you cannot make a implementation today that is right for a company that might be 10 times the size of the company that you are working for. Because if you do, you will just cripple the company today. It's better to pay the cost at a later stage. And that's something that is very important. Product maturity. A product has to go through evolution just as anything. And if you try to speed that up too quickly, you might actually just damage the company. Have a great day.